So again, good morning, everyone, and a very warm welcome to you all. My name is João Costa, and I am the Director of the European Agency for Special Needs and Inclusive Education, EASNIE. It is a real pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar and to open the very first session of our new Inclusion Talks webinar series. This series is being launched as part of EASNIE's 30th anniversary celebrations, and it reflects our ongoing commitment to creating spaces for dialogue, shared learning, and reflections on inclusive education across Europe and beyond Europe. For those of you who may be less familiar with our work, EASNIE is an independent organization that supports ministries of education in 32 member countries, EU members and partner countries, in developing high-quality, inclusive education systems. We work closely with policymakers, practitioners, researchers, and international organizations to provide evidence-based analysis, comparative data, and practical tools that support inclusive policies and practices. At the heart of our work is a shared vision that all learners of any age have the right to inclusive, equitable, and high-quality education. The Inclusion Talk series consists of monthly webinars, bringing together leading voices in the field of inclusive education alongside policymakers and experts. Together, we aim to share insights, research findings, and practical perspectives on inclusive education with a look towards the future. Over the coming months, we'll address several key themes such as teacher preparedness, family and learner participation, quality assurance, financing models, artificial intelligence, multiculturalism and multilingualism, all together with inclusive education, models, frameworks, and practices. The webinars take place from 11 to 12 Central European Time on the last Thursday of each month, with a break in July and August, and slightly earlier times in June and December. Today's session, Inclusive Education Key Principles, sets the foundation for the entire series, reflecting also EASNIE's vision, principles, and definition on what constitutes inclusive education. We will explore the core principles that underpin inclusive education, why inclusion matters, and how these principles can be embedded in education systems. The discussion will combine global perspectives with practical strategies for creating equitable learning environments for all learners. I am delighted to be joined today by our three speakers: Professor Mel Ainscow, Emeritus Professor of Education at the University of Manchester, England; Professor Gordon Porter, Executive Director of Inclusive Education Canada; and Dr. Mónica Domínguez García, Director General of Assessment and Territorial Cooperation at the Ministry of Education in Spain. Thank you all for being with us today. Before we begin, just a few practical points. This webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be shared with you after the session. If you experience any technical issues, please contact my colleagues via the chat function. If you have questions during the session, and we will have a question and answering period, please type them into the Q&A box or in the chat at the bottom of your screen. We will address as many questions as possible during the discussion, and I will be posing the questions that we can select to pose to our speakers. First, with that, let us begin. I am pleased to introduce our first speaker, Professor Mel Ainscow, who is more than a regular consultant to EASNIE, is a friend of EASNIE with us from the very beginning. He is an Emeritus Professor at the University of Manchester, Professor of Education at the University of Glasgow, and an Adjunct Professor at Queensland University of Technology. A long-term consultant to UNESCO, he is internationally recognized as a leading authority on inclusion and equity in education. We are delighted and very grateful to have you to open today's discussion. Thank you, Mel. Over to you.
Thank you, João, and it's a great pleasure to join this important series of discussions at a very good moment in terms of global developments. what I want to do in my presentation is to talk about system reform in relation to inclusion and equity. Over many years, I've had the privilege of supporting and working with countries in different parts of the world, trying to promote the idea of inclusion and equity. And as I've done that, of course, I'm trying to learn from those experiences. So I'm going to summarize what I think I've learned so far. And I underline so far because I continue on my journey of learning from all of those experiences. I locate the discussion in relation to global developments, and of course there are lots of them that are relevant. I particularly talk about Sustainable Development Goal 4, which was introduced as part of the 17 goals in 2015 and is influencing policy around the world. And it provides some quite of useful links for us as we think about what this is about. As a result of the Sustainable Development Goal 4, there's agreed a framework of action which I think is quite useful to set the agenda for this discussion. Inclusion and equity, it says, in and through education is the cornerstone of a transformative education agenda. Now, I want you to take note of the word transformative, because I think that's what's crucial to what I want to talk to you about. This is not something else. This is what education has to be about. It goes on to say, we therefore, we being the governments of the world that agreed to this policy, to making the necessary change in education policies, are focusing our efforts on the most disadvantaged, especially those with disabilities, to ensure that no one is left behind, to a transformative agenda in which no one is left behind. As part of my work with UNESCO in 2017, I coordinated a group of international experts in producing this guide for ensuring inclusion and equity in education. It's available freely on the UNESCO website in a number of languages, and it provides a framework which can be used to look at national policies or district policies or local area policies. And the group that met to develop this guide came up with this motto, which I think for me sums up what this is about. Every learner matters and matters equally. So this is the principle that I take into all the work I do in working in my own country and sometimes in other parts of the world. So this transformative agenda is about changing education systems, and we have to be respectful as to what that involves. The picture you can see, I hope, which I found somewhere on our website, is in a sense summarizing the traditional approach to policy development that occurs around the world. Basically, the idea is that politicians, ministers, and civil servants, they develop a policy, in this case, an inclusion policy, and it's fed into the system, in the case of this illustration, through a kind of machine, and then it comes out at the other end and is met by people at the local level. Maybe these are local district coordinators, or most likely and most importantly, school principals, school directors. So they receive the policy, they read it, and they put it into practice. It's very simple, it's very clear. Politicians tend to like this because it obviously creates them as being the center of all of this, and of course they have a role to play. So this is basically summarizing the approach to policy change. There's only one problem: it doesn't work. So if we're to understand how to change our education systems in relation to inclusion and equity, we have to be more sophisticated in understanding why it doesn't work and what might work. So from my experience, and obviously reading a lot of the research as well around educational change, it seems to me there are certain things that we need to keep in mind when we're talking about moving education systems forward in relation to inclusion and equity. First of all, we need to be clear that policy is made at all levels of an education system. Of course, it's made at the government level, and that's crucial, but then it's interpreted by different players at the different levels as we move towards the classroom. And of course, the most important level is the classroom level, because what we know is that teachers and other people who work at the classroom level, they create policy. Now, they may have read the national policy, they may understand it, they may disagree with it, but what they do is what makes a difference. So as far as the children are concerned, Once the teacher closes the door, he or she is creating the policy. So consequently, what we can say is that educational change is technically simple, but socially complex. It's not that difficult to say what needs to happen. The question is, can we get everybody to understand it, agree with it, and work together to make it happen? And as I stress, teachers themselves and other practitioners are crucial. So what this tells us is, if we are to bring about educational change at the system level, there needs to be clarity of purpose. Now, terms like inclusion and equity, the sort of terms that people like me use coming from universities, seem very clear in a way, but of course they're not necessarily clear to busy people in the field. They get a sense of what it's about, but it doesn't provide the kind of clarity that is needed in order to move forward. So I'll come back to a moment as to what that clarity should be about. And the other thing that we know in terms of system change, it's about clarity, but it's also about evidence. And what we've seen from a lot of experience, evidence of various kinds, not just statistics, but statistics are very important, can be a catalyst for successful change processes. So gathering and engaging with evidence about what's happening in the field is in a sense a lever for moving the system forward. So working with systems, as I've done, I've tried to put together what I think I've learned in a way that might be practically useful. And I'm going to suggest and talk about 6 strategies which seem to me to be quite important. And they link to what I've already said about the complexity of system change. It seems to me that inclusion and equity have to be seen as principles that inform educational policies. Now, when I talk to policymakers in countries, sometimes even the minister, but certainly senior civil servants, I usually say, don't have a policy for inclusion and equity. And when I say that, I can see people sit back. You're saying we shouldn't have a policy? I'm saying no. If you have a policy, it becomes somebody's job. Somebody will be allocated the task of leading and coordinating the process of inclusion and equity. It hasn't got to be somebody's job. It's got to be everybody's job. All those people at the different levels. So for me, inclusion and equity is not a policy. It's a set of principles. I've summed it up. Every learner matters and matters equally. And those principles have to inform all policies. The policy for curriculum, the policy for funding, the policy for teacher education, the policy for accountability that exists within a country. Those principles have to be there informing all of those policies. Then we have to link about what we mean when we say inclusion and equity. And as I've said already, this is the big challenge. Now, for me, as I've said already, it's a system of educational reform. It has to focus on 3 broad interconnected levels. It's about the presence of children, who is there, who is attending, who is missing. But even that's not enough, because you can be present and you can be overlooked or ignored. So it's also about the participation of children. They're there in the school, they're there in the classroom, but they're actually participating. Their name is used. They're seen as being significant members of the school community. But what I'm saying is, even that is insufficient, because you could be present, you could be participating, and you might not be learning anything that's useful to you. So the ultimate goal, the nirvana, if you will, of inclusion and equity is achievement. It's achievement of all children. So that's why I'm saying this is not another project. This is about the central strategy within a country for developing more successful and effective education systems. And part of my argument is that movements guided by the principle, every learner matters equally, will actually have a significant impact on all learners within a particular country. So my definition is about the presence, participation and achievement of all learners, but it also particularly focuses on the concept of barriers. Particularly what I'm talking about are contextual barriers. So the curriculum can be a barrier if it's not designed with all children in mind. The systems of assessment can be a barrier if they don't record and celebrate the progress of all children, some of whom may be making quite slow progress. Our teaching methods can be a barrier if we don't know how to design and manage a classroom where our children can feel that they are valued and recognised as being a part of the class process. Some of the most difficult barriers, of course, are the barriers in our minds. If we don't believe it's possible that all children can be present and participate and achieve, then probably it's unlikely we will make progress. Now, this is crucial, and I want to underline this. I invite you to think about it. I am not talking about barriers within children or within families. I'm not saying there aren't factors and differences, but they are barriers that we have very little control over. I'm talking about barriers that we can control, contextual barriers. That idea of the barriers within children, that's part of the history. It comes from the field of special education, and I was part of that field. I was a director of a special school many years ago. That thinking, that's sometimes called the medical model, what's wrong with the child? Can we fix the child? That, in my view, is an enormous barrier to progress within the field. So I'm talking about contextual barriers, things that we can do something about. The third strategy that I'm suggesting is that this has to be about the development of schools. Schools that make progress in relation to this agenda, and I've met many of them in different parts of the world, including in my own country, they become places of learning, not just for children, but also for adults. So there's an emphasis on professional learning in those schools, where teachers and support staff are working together to think about what else can we do to overcome those barriers that I've talked about. So the schools become learning communities. And of course, an obvious implication of that is that has to be led. There are issues about school leadership that have to be part of this agenda. I've also found from working in many different parts of the world that partnerships between schools can add value to what individual teachers and schools are trying to do. So in the most successful systems that I've worked with, at the local level and occasionally at the national level, this involves creating whatever the words are, networks of schools, partnerships of schools, clusters of schools, where schools are moving knowledge around and sharing and supporting one another in finding ways of overcoming those barriers to which I have referred. But then this is not just about schools. It has to go beyond the school gate. And so progress has to involve links with partners, particularly, of course, families, not just parents, but grandparents. I'm one of those, siblings, other members of the community as well, and organizations, local businesses, local religious organizations, universities, I think, have a very important role to play in this system reform program that I'm alluding to. And then finally, as a strategy, this has to be coordinated. Now, this is where context is so important. And indeed, implicit in everything I've said is that these ideas have to be interpreted in different ways in different places. Context matters. But one thing we can say in general, these school-led partnerships involving wider community partners, they need some kind of local coordination. Now, that will vary, the form that takes, from place to place. There's one other thing I want to say to sum all this up. Remember what I said. It's technically simple, but socially complex. So the most important thing is bringing people together. People within the school, people within the classroom, children themselves can be a player in this process. It's about bringing together the community, families, and so on. And the most important thing, in my experience, is the collective will to make it happen. And I encourage you to think about that in terms of your own experience. In terms of the ideas I've talked about, I've done 2 recent books, Developing Inclusive Schools, which is about school level development, and there are lots of accounts of schools in different parts of the world. And then more recently, I've produced a book called Reforming Education Systems for Inclusion and Equity, the theme that I've talked about during this talk. And in there are lots of examples from different parts of the world. I hope that's useful, and I look forward to your thoughts and comments. Thank you very much.
you so much, Mel. Thank you for your insights. Thank you for showing us once again that inclusion is possible, that the easy part is to write a legislation. The hard part is to address these contextual barriers, as you mentioned, but with this very positive note that we don't need to fix the child, we need to change the system. I will turn to our second speaker, Dr. Gordon Porter, Executive Director of Inclusive Education Canada. With over 4 decades of experience, Gordon has worked as a school leader, university professor, and international policy advisor, supporting ministries of education across multiple continents. His work has been widely recognized, including through the Order of Canada, one of the country's highest civil honors. We are very pleased to welcome you today, Gordon. Very pleased that you are joining our 30th anniversary celebration. You also, like Mel, you are part of our 30 years of history. So I'll give you the floor, thanking you very much for your presence.
Thank you very much. I appreciate being invited to participate in this event. I did have my first contact with people in the association prior to when it was formed. Cor Mayer, I met him in Salamanca and met him with a delegation of people who visited the schools where I worked back in New Brunswick, Canada. So thank you very much. I want to share a few practical things that I think make a difference in inclusive education, implementing an inclusive education policy. I think it does follow off from Professor Ainscow's presentation and dives into several things that I think are critical to make inclusion work, particularly around supporting teachers. So my focus is on, and I was invited to talk about how you support teachers to make inclusion a reality. And I want to start just with a few context-setting observations about the challenge of inclusive education from the point of view of teachers. And I think that in my experience, teachers generally support inclusion. Certainly in Canada, it's any survey that's been taken about teacher attitudes is that they welcome inclusion, particularly young graduates of teacher training programs are inclined to support inclusion as a basic human right. But the important point is that teachers can't do that without support. They need support, and if they don't get it, then you get lots of stories in the media and from parents and from teachers that inclusion is a failure. And when that happens, when it isn't properly supported, when teachers aren't properly supported, inclusion can be blamed for almost everything that's wrong about the education system. Now, in my experience, inclusion fails when support to teachers is in theory available, but is not directly available when they need it and the kind of support that they need. If it happens here and there, as opposed to very directly, that makes a big difference. And the other point that I would make is that expertise has to be cultivated and developed within the school. The responsibility for the success of a teacher in a classroom is clear, but that responsibility is shared with others, with other teachers, other staff members, and in fact with the community as a whole. The important point is to recognize that problems that either teachers or students have are reflective of the system being deficient, not the student themselves. Now, I put this slide up just to show that that I do have an understanding that there are a number of factors that are relevant to supporting teachers. I'm not going to read through these. You can see what they are. But I want to zero in on what teachers say they need more directly. So what do they tell us they need? They need timely and practical support. The expertise that they draw on day to day, hour by hour, week by week, needs to be embedded and developed in the school itself. If expertise to solve problems, whether major or not so serious problems, is seen with experts outside the school, that does not help make inclusion work well. Collaborative problem solving is the focus, and leaders need to make it normal for teachers to ask for help. Even today, I hear about school systems where teachers being used to and welcoming someone from outside the classroom to support them is seen as an innovation and something, a challenge that has to be met. And that clearly is something that needs to be reflected from leadership, that teachers who need help should raise their hand, push a button, whatever it is they need to do, and say, I could use some help. And it's not a negative thing. It's not perceived negatively in terms of their professional competence. So teachers' capacity to include students is shaped by building a system of support. Now, a few years ago, and it doesn't seem so long to me, but it's now, 13, 14 years. Back in 2012, I had a position as a senior advisor to the Minister of Education in our province, New Brunswick. And we were able to do things that were coming from the top of the education system, which not always is easy to have happen. And one of the things we did is have a full day of engagement on inclusion and what it takes to be successful in every school in the province and every English language school, because we have two systems, French and English. But in the English schools, every school focused for a day on what they needed to do to have more success with inclusion. And at the end of the day, they had to complete a survey, online survey, and 5,000 teachers in New Brunswick, who by that point had a system that was called inclusive for 30 years, 25 or 30 years. And they were asked what the most valuable support to help them make inclusion successful is what. And the chart that you see lays out the 10 most frequent answers. And I'm not going to read through them all, but I will just suggest to you, I hope you can see them on your screen, that the first 5 or 6 focus on collaboration, talking with other people in the school and with parents, planning, developing capacity to serve all the children in a class. So with that in mind, I want to turn to my 2 specific topics in supporting teachers. The first is embedding a school-based support team model that reflects the support available from a variety of staff members who are not working actively as classroom teachers, although that can include some classroom teachers on occasion, as a fundamental of how the school operates, a school-based support team. And secondly, I want to talk about the role of the support teacher and the support teacher model. And I'll try to do this expeditiously. So the school-based support team includes the principal, the school leadership, the support teacher. Those are 2 of the critical people. School counselors, specialists who might be embedded in the school for specific reasons of literacy, mathematics, behavioral programs and expertise, teacher assistants, school psychologists, if they're embedded in the school. All of these people in my view, have one responsibility, and that's to make sure that the classroom teacher has success in teaching every student in their class. That's the fundamental of inclusion. Inclusion for me means that children are in regular classes with their peers. And that means classroom teachers are doing the primary work of the school. And everyone else in the school must focus on supporting the teacher. Now, just a little about the support team model. I think it needs to be collaborative and problem solving and looking at challenges, not individual student issues necessarily, but teacher issues, things that the teacher needs in order to be effective. And the key characteristics are that it's a standing structure. It's not something that happens every so often if people decide to do it. In my experience, it's something that should happen at a minimum of once a week, that these people who provide support to teachers come together. And what do? They talk about what they've experienced during the week, which teachers are having particular challenges, who might be best equipped to help them with that challenge, focusing on instructional and environmental barriers, and figuring out how together they can help teachers solve these problems. This is just another slide showing who would be members of the school-based team. And to emphasize a few quick points, the team needs to respond quickly, not waiting weeks or months. When you have expertise outside the school and when teachers defer to people who are specialists outside the school at the district level or at the regional level or out of a special center that's external to their building, their school, it means that teachers sort of step back and wait for somebody with, quote, expertise to help them figure out what to do. Most of the support that teachers needs to come from people already in the school who know the culture of the school, know the teachers, know what they can and perhaps what they have difficulty doing, and working to develop teaching and classroom practices that will deal with the issues the teacher encounters in providing instruction. When you have a really strongly focused school-based support team, there's reduced isolation. Teachers don't feel isolated. They feel part of a team. Issues are addressed earlier. Inclusion across the school. There are 15 teachers, 20 teachers, 30 teachers. The team works so the consistency of approach with students is evident. And as a consequence, demands for inclusion decline. So we take the focus from managing students to strengthening the school and the teacher and strengthening the capacity to serve. So that's the school-based support team, critical in my view. The second support for teachers that I want to talk about is the support teacher model. Now, this is called various things in different jurisdictions: learning support teachers, resource teachers. Fundamentally, the support teacher plays a role in working as the member of the school-based team that's out there visiting with teachers, responding to their immediate requests. They're not assigned to teach a class, so their role is to provide coaching, backup, collaboration, problem solving, being a mentor, co-teaching, all of the other things that teachers need help with to do the real life, real day-to-day challenges that classroom teachers face. Now, support teachers need to work alongside classroom teachers. They model, they help adjust pacing, grouping, they connect one teacher to another. One of the strategies I've found most incisive with support teachers is to connect one teacher with another teacher in the same school who maybe has an idea about how to do something more effectively that'll help. All of the expertise doesn't need to be within the support teacher, him or herself, but they link expertise, experience, capacity from one teacher to another, share and facilitate. The classroom teacher always retains responsibility, but support to build capacity is continually the focus, not replacing the teacher, but supporting the teacher. Now, I want to turn to what makes this model work and what doesn't. And I had 20 years experience bringing together this position, implementing it in schools, going to the schools myself and coaching and working with support teachers to see that they adapted and adopted the kind of practices that actually delivered the kind of support that teachers need. And these are a few things that I draw from that experience. First of all, in my mind, a support teacher, in order to have credibility and to have the kind of knowledge about making inclusion work in a classroom, have to have had substantial classroom experience themselves. In my mind, I would never appoint a support teacher who hasn't had 3 to 5 years of successful classroom experience themselves, and who have the kind of knowledge and skills and temperament, because the work is with adults as well as knowing about children's learning, that they can successfully fulfill this role. Certainly, support teachers need to have a general understanding of curriculum and what the school and what teachers are trying to accomplish. They need to know what teachers can do and what they can't do, what's realistic, what kind of supports are needed to make what the teacher needs to do realistic. And fundamentally, they have to be seen not as a supervisor, not as a boss or an evaluator or somebody putting their judgment on how competent the teacher is, but as a peer, as somebody who's a teacher, just like the teacher they're working with, one with different experiences, different capacities, different skills, perhaps, and perhaps more of all of that, but not a boss, a peer, a collaborator. And support works best when it comes from an experienced, successful teacher. And just to add, so many times I've found support teachers who are just freshly out of university and are assigned to that responsibility, perhaps because of a course they took or a program that they followed in teacher training. And fundamentally, if those situations work well, it's probably by accident as opposed to planning, because experience and competence built from practical experience is essential, in my experience, to have credibility, to go into a classroom and to help classroom teachers solve a problem, figure out what to do. Okay, the final thing I want to refer to on this slide is that problem solving is essential. People who are in the role of a support teacher need to welcome the challenge of working on solving a problem. You don't want people with a temperament of being overwhelmed by the problems or difficulties. You want a positive thinking, problem solving person. And in my experience over the years, we've had a lot of success with a model we call teachers helping teachers. It's based on a model that came out of a couple of experts in the United States. And I won't go into details on this, but I'll just tell you that one of the things that I've always tried to encourage is that school capacity to bring teachers together collectively to focus on a problem one of their colleagues is having, finding strategies that the teacher might or might not find useful, and making that a systemic kind of approach is essential to making this model work. And in the site that you can find that Inclusive Education Canada created a year or two ago called Source for Inclusive Education. There's a section on problem solving, and within that, you'll find the section on teachers helping teachers. And a video and manual is available for that model in English, French, and Spanish. And if you're interested in that, it's a school-based problem-solving approach that I have found to be fundamentally useful. Now, the final thing I want to focus on is we have a support teacher, but what do they do with their time? Time. And I have to tell you that it's not always a good, we don't always find positive things when we look at how resource teachers or support teachers spent their time. We did a significant survey back in that period, again, when I was a senior advisor to the Minister of Education in New Brunswick. We did several research activities where we asked resource teachers to record how they were using their time. And I won't go into details, but there's an article about it that was published shortly after that in the Canadian Education Association Journal, Education Canada. It's still available if you Google it online. And what we found is that support teachers weren't doing what we thought they were, and they weren't doing it in the proportions that we considered to be most effective. So what we ended up is a focus that you see on the screen now. And that is that a support teacher in their daily work should spend a minimum, note the word minimum, of 60% of their time directly supporting a classroom teacher, focusing on the teacher. And the way I would describe that is that if what the support teacher is doing is directly connected to helping teacher Mary Smith, then that would meet this criteria. But if it's something else that's diffuse, unfocused, a general school activity, but it's not focused directly on supporting a particular teacher or maybe several teachers, then it wouldn't fit under this quad. So a minimum of 60% of their time directly supporting teachers. And the other two categories of time that they may on occasion need to do are expressed in maximums. So a maximum of 25% of their time working with students. And I would be very directive in saying working with students should be focused on informing the support teacher on how the student learns and what some of the particulars are about that student so they can work with that student's teacher to figure out what needs to be done in the classroom. That would be my definition of what working with students would be focused on. And finally, a maximum of 15% of their time on all the other tasks that, believe me, school principals can find to keep resource teachers busy, to keep support teachers busy, whether it's supervising on the playground, sitting in a first aid room with a student who's ill or whatever. There are so many things that pile up with a teacher who is not scheduled to be in front of a class during particular time, that this is one of the elements that easily starts to erode the ability of the support teacher to help classroom teachers. And we represent this in this diagram. And this has been laid out. I did some work in a few years ago in the Northwest Territories of Canada, and they prepared what I think is this very visually pleasing outline of this concept. And they list fully the kind of things that fit under each of these categories of activity: strengthening instruction, working and supporting teachers, working with students, and doing all the other planning and organizational duties that can be laid at the feet of a support teacher. So, wrapping up, inclusion works when support to classroom teachers is timely, teachers support students, systems in the school support the teacher. Expertise is school-based, it's not external, doesn't lie with university experts, it doesn't lie with psychologists and psychiatrists and therapists of various types who are outside the school. Although from time to time, all of that expertise is needed. But the fundamental expertise of serving children is seen to be school-based. Support teachers are experienced educators. They have the respect and high regard of their colleagues. And leaders make collaboration non-negotiable. When teachers are supported, they can make inclusion a success. And if they don't, if they're not supported, then you hear the stories about inclusion being responsible for all of the ills that public education can be seen to be responsible for. Thank you very much. Appreciate your attention.
Thank you very much, Gordon. Thank you for this very valuable presentation. Thank you for starting with the teacher voice, with what teachers report in where we can support them better, for this big focus on collaboration. For our wider audience, two of our main ongoing activities at EASNIE focus on collaboration, advancing collaboration in education and cross-sectoral collaboration. And I invite everyone to visit our website and see our deliverables on this topic. And for this very pragmatic view on what is the role of the teachers and the support teachers in the system. Just before I turn to our third speaker, just remind everyone that you can use the Q&A item on your screen to post questions to the speakers, and I will then try to represent you in the questions, both in the chat function and the Q&A. So I will now turn to our final speaker. It's Mónica Domínguez García, Director General of Assessment and Territorial Cooperation in Spain. Mónica brings extensive experience across teaching, school leadership, inspection, and higher education, and now leads national work on curriculum, assessment, inclusion, digital education, and teacher development. Quite a portfolio. Her perspective offers valuable insight into how inclusive education is shaped and implemented at the system level. Thank you for joining us, Mónica, and I give you the floor.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for inviting us to take part in this Inclusion Talks webinar series. It's a privilege and a really honor for me to share space with Professor Mel Ainscow and Dr. Gordon Porter. Your many contributions provide an invaluable framework and remind us always of the global dimension of inclusive education. Truly, inclusive systems are built on collective responsibility, shared learning, collaboration, and continuous reflection. It is precisely with these ideas in mind that Spain is currently developing its strategic plan for inclusive education, the process of which I am pleased to present you today. So thank you all for joining and for taking interest in our plan. In this presentation, I will be talking about some of the transformations set out in our education law after the most recent reform, to then move on to give you a brief overview of the strategic plan we have been working on for over a year. Some years ago, Spain started a reform of the education system, with the firm commitment of advancing towards a more inclusive education system. The first step taken was amending the education law. The revised text of the law, named LOMLOE, which came out in 2020, upholds the rights contained in the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and of course, in the 2030 Agenda. Our law, the LOM law, recognizes inclusive education as the central principle of our education system and as the most powerful instrument for achieving equality in society. The education law is oriented towards ensuring that every child can develop to their full potential and that the schools should be safe and nourishing spaces where all students can flourish and no one is left behind. One of the key changes set out in the amended law has been a provision which sets a 10-year horizon to equip mainstream schools with the necessary resources to ensure quality education for all students, but especially for students with disabilities, while continuing to support the special education centers and strengthening their role as reference and support hubs for inclusive practice. With this mandate, we started taking the first steps towards designing the strategic plan of inclusive education, which stems from the principles set out in the LOM law. The plan represents a political, but especially an ethical and educational commitment. It builds on the shared responsibility of all the stakeholders to guarantee the presence and the participation of all children and to ensure the development of all students to their full potential. Rather than presenting isolated actions or parallel responses, the plan promotes a systemic transformation of education, one that moves from individual solutions to collective and sustainable change. All along the way, the strategic plan is being developed in close cooperation between the Ministry of Education, the autonomous region, and different stakeholders involved in inclusion in its wider sense. By this, we mean not only those involved in the inclusion of people with different disabilities, but also different ethnic groups, such as Romani or immigrant students. The plan aspires to be comprehensive, incorporating all the voices and needs of all the stakeholders, sustainable and relevant. It is grounded in expert understanding and informed by national, European, and international evidence. Equally, the elaboration process aims to be as highly participatory as possible. Through different consultation mechanisms, it aims to ensure the integration of the technical perspective, the view of policymakers, that of institutions, professional bodies, including school inspectors, school leaders, teachers, the academia, and the civil society, and most importantly, the voice of students and families. Thanks to this process, the plan is emerging as a consensus document, built collectively and designed to reflect the reality of the entire educational community. As it was just mentioned, we have established different consultation mechanisms to reach all stakeholders. For institutional consultation, we have counted on already existing work groups with the autonomous region. We have 17, both through a specific working group for inclusive education and through other thematic working groups dealing with related matters. For example, the teacher training working group, the emotional well-being working group, or the early childhood education working group. In addition, we have the contribution of other official participatory spaces, such as the Forum for the Educational Inclusion of Students with Disabilities or the State Council of the Roma people. Both have ensured that voices and perspectives, often underrepresented, are fully incorporated. Further, we are still preparing events such as conferences, webinars, meetings with the participation of universities, professional bodies, civil society organizations, families, and students. All of these have a lot to contribute to the shaping the plan. And equally, there has been a space for individual consultation and contribution through other mechanisms, such as, for instance, by scheduling interviews with smaller associations or representative bodies. This slide offers only a quick view of some of the institutions, organizations, and representative entities that are actively contributing their expertise and collaboration throughout the participatory process. They include families, educators, disability organizations, social inclusion networks, Roma communities, deans of education faculties, thus ensuring a wide range of perspectives. Having explained how the strategic plan for inclusive education is being developed, I would like to move now to giving a more detailed description of it, starting with the 10 objectives, the 10 main objectives we have set out to achieve with the plan. These are promoting a culture of respect for diversity, developing curricula that caters for diversity and promotes the development of all students to their full potential, strengthening teacher training and promoting inclusive methodologies, providing mainstream education centers with the necessary resources and supports, ensuring early detection and intervention, improving universal accessibility, promoting active policies against school segregation, strengthening collaboration between mainstream and special education centers. The latter can continue catering for students that require more specialist care, but we want that they can act as centers of reference and support for mainstream schools. And the last two objectives, fostering interinstitutional cooperation, and the last one is really needed, implementing continuous monitoring and evaluation mechanisms. The plan is structured around 9 interconnected areas, each area reinforcing the others, and together they form a coherent roadmap for systemic change. These 9 areas are, what you can see, are as follows. The first one, school access, presence, and enrollment. The second one, creating a culture of inclusion and values. The third one, school organization and management. 4, curriculum development. 5, human and material resources. 6, guidance. 7, teacher training, both initial and in service. 8, collaboration with special education centers. And the last one, community participation and involvement of families and local networks. We are now approaching the last stages of the design of the plan before it is ready to be presented to the public. And I want to say that during these last months, the EASNIE is going to provide the technical support to carry out the quality validation of the plan. We are also trying to include in the process the main researchers of our country in this field so that we can verify that the plan is truly based on sound evidence. Running parallel to this, we continue creating opportunities to listen and share experiences to ensure that the plan remains dynamic through collaboration and closely rooted in real-life experience. Well, is that one important milestone is the workshop planned in Malaga in March of this year to collect further insights and contributions, which will bring together families, students, professionals such as teachers, school inspectors, head teachers, or school counselors, and obviously civil society representatives. Finally, we plan to officially present the strategic plan of inclusive education in Spain approximately in the autumn of 2026. To conclude, inclusive education is not an abstract aspiration or a future goal. It is a present-day responsibility and a fundamental right. The Spanish strategic plan for inclusive education represents a firm step towards making that right a reality for every learner. The plan is grounded on the firm belief that this requires the collective engagement and commitment of policymakers, educators, leaders, families, students, and the community as a whole, all learning from one another, sharing responsibility, and working together across boundaries. By building schools that welcome diversity and that promote success for all, we believe we are contributing to building a more equal and open society. The task ahead is demanding, but is guided by conviction and shared responsibility. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Monica. Thank you for giving us an example of what a country is doing and in terms of development of policy, as Mel said at the beginning, moving from the principle to the several policies that have to be developed. We are a bit beyond our schedule, but I think we can have a tolerance of 5-10 minutes. So I will read some of the questions that we got, and then in the same order of presentations, I will give you the floor again for quick reactions. One is very pragmatic. It's a question to Gordon on where these materials on teachers can be found on your website. But I would focus on a question we got on the relation, and this will be the topic of one of our webinars. As we are moving to technology-driven societies, more and more ministries of education are developing national digital education strategies. However, the issue of equity and inclusion has not yet been addressed in a comprehensive and coordinated way across digital education priorities. So if you have an opinion or an input on this, EASNIE would be very happy to hear from you. Then we have a question by Kamal Jabr on what is the extent that the current system supports teachers through timely school-based collaborative structures rather than expecting individual teachers to manage inclusion on their own. This is a very important question on how the system can help and not just expect the teachers individually to do things. Then two questions more targeted to countries. Maybe I would focus on the question about the Spanish system and how familiar you are with it, but maybe Monica can also contribute to this on this figure of the support teacher. And I think this is a big challenge for many countries. In many countries, we think as the support teacher, like Gordon said, as supporting the students and not supporting the teachers. And then, so there is this expectation that the role of the teacher is a different one. So I guess the question is also for Monica on whether Spain is rethinking the role of the support teachers. So I'll start with Mel, please.
Okay, well, thank you for that. And it's been very enjoyable listening to the different contributions. I want to repeat something I said in passing, that when we're talking about moving systems forward, context matters. And so what works in one place might not work in other places. And I think if we talk at the level of principles, that's fine. But the practicalities need to be sorted out at the local level. Obviously, Gordon talks a lot about Canada, which is a highly resourced system. Spain, I think, probably is less resourced. But then you have to look at other factors. So if you take, the example that I know best, which is England, why we have to look at it from a systems point of view is what drives things in England are test scores and inspection of schools. These are very powerful levers for change. And frankly, in England, I'm sorry to be disloyal to my country, these are often creating barriers to the presence, participation, achievement of some children. So this is why this has to look at overall policy within a particular context and create a debate about what kind of education system do we want, which of course, going back to Salamanca, takes us to the point, what kind of society do we want? The idea really is schools where the next generation learn to live together, really. So I want to keep repeating, context matters, and you can, listen to what's happening in Spain or Canada, or now I've just mentioned England, but then you have to look at your own context and say, what are the structural barriers in our place, and how can we work together to address them?
Thank you, Mel. Gordon?
Thank you. The practical question first. The materials that we have are primarily on our site called sourcefoриnclusiveeducation.ca. And if you search that, you should be able to find it. And it's a site that is sort of designed for teachers, families who know a little bit about inclusive education but want to explore it more. It's not meant to be a replacement for graduate training at that level. It's sort of a foundational kind of introduction to basic ideas about inclusive education. And that's where some of the practical things that I've talked about can be found. In terms of how you change the system, how you build a school that's inclusive and that brings together the experience and capacity of teachers to serve students, a wide, diverse population of students, increasingly diverse, even in small towns in Canada. We have a much more diverse population than we did 30, 40 years ago. So I think that there's no substitution for direct contact with and challenge and engagement with school-based people. Having principals come together, giving them training in how to operate a school-based team, showing them how collectively pulling together the knowledge and experience of the teachers in their school can help plan and figure out effective ways to serve children better. My assertion always is that 95% or more of anything that a teacher needs to know about serving students well is probably known by other people in the school. Maybe not any one person, but collectively. Most of what teachers need to know is available to them if they could find a way to engage and collaborate with other teachers in their school. So I think that administrators, policymakers, people in ministries of education have to have the trust and the willingness to allow people on the ground in the schools to get together, collaborate, have models set out for them, and give them coaching on how to use these new approaches. Being a school principal is not about being a leader in the traditional sense of giving orders and having people be accountable. Being a school principal today and being a support teacher is about bringing people together, collectively solving problems. And if there has to be an investment in that, that means time, it means money that has to be focused on that kind of process. And unfortunately, time for people to do those sorts of things is one of the very earliest things that cost cutters, the accountants and the people with the account books eliminate from the system.
Thank you, Gordon. And now back to you, Monica. There was also a question from our colleague Olga from Latvia on what is the expectation and the reality about special schools in your system.
Yes, well, first of all, I totally agree with the question that has been made to Spain. I totally agree with everything that both have you spoken, but especially about teachers that Dr. Porter has been talking about. I totally agree that teachers need, first of all, all the support. Second, they need time to be effective, this support. And third, obviously, and special and training teacher courses. So we need to have in all the schools a support team, and a specialized support team, so that the way we are doing now in Spain, we are modifying to questions that I think they are key for this. By one side, we are modifying the teacher initial training so that we have all completely aligned with the law and with the principles we want. We need that every teacher in early childhood or in primary school or secondary school, not only the special teachers, we need that all the teachers have very, very clearly that they are teachers to give response to all the children they have in the class. So it's essential that it is being done. But the other side, we are modifying the law that to give more time to the teachers so that they can prepare and coordinate with other teachers and less time being with students. I think it is essential, and obviously, as I said at the beginning, we are working with all the communities, all the region, all our regions, so that they can assume this and then be done in every territory.
Thank you, Mónica. Well, this discussion and some of the questions that keep popping up just mean that our series will continue, and many of the implementation dimensions that were mentioned. We'll have a webinar on school leadership. The next one will be on teacher preparedness, on resourcing and financial models for resourcing the schools. So I invite you all that follow this seminar to this webinar to be present in the next ones. I'd like to thank you very much, the three of you, Mel Ainscow, Gordon Porter, Mónica Domínguez García, for your insightful and thought-provoking contributions. Thank you all the participants for your questions, for your engagement during this webinar. Today's discussion has highlighted both the enduring principles of inclusive education and the importance of translating principles into coherent policies and practices. As a reminder, the recording of this webinar will be shared with you, and we warmly invite you to join us for the next session in the Inclusion Talk series on February 26th on inclusive education and teacher preparedness. Details of the upcoming webinars will be available through EASNIE's website and our communication channels. Please follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. Thank you once again for being with us today, and I wish you a very good and inclusive rest of the day. Thank you.